In 1938, the famous writer George Orwell visited Marrakech, Morocco, and recorded his experiences in an essay. He describes the sights and sounds of the city, but what really stands out is his observation of the poverty and degradation of the local people. George Orwell was visiting Marrakech, Morocco, and as he was eating in a restaurant, he witnessed a funeral procession passing by. The flies swarmed around the corpse, and the mourners, all men and boys, carried the body on a wooden bier. Orwell was struck by the fact that there were no coffins for the dead, only rags to wrap the bodies. The burial ground was a wasteland with no gravestones or markers, and after a few months, no one could locate the exact spot where their relatives were buried. As Orwell walked through the town, he observed the people, mostly brown-skinned, living in extreme poverty. He found it difficult to believe that he was walking among human beings, and it reminded him that colonial empires were built on the exploitation of such people. He wondered if they were considered individual beings or just a mass of undifferentiated brown stuff, like bees or coral insects, as they worked hard and died unnoticed. Even the graves soon faded into the soil, and sometimes Orwell could feel the bumps under his feet, reminding him that he was walking over skeletons. In the public gardens, Orwell fed a gazelle and could not help thinking of mint sauce when he looked at its hindquarters. The gazelle seemed to sense this and nibbled at the bread before butting Orwell with its head. An Arab navvy working nearby noticed the strange behavior and watched Orwell and the gazelle with amazement. He then shyly asked Orwell for some bread, which Orwell gave him, and the man gratefully hid it under his rags. Orwell realized that the man was an employee of the municipality. Orwell walked through the Jewish quarters of Marrakech, where he observed the conditions of the medieval ghettos. The Jews were only allowed to own land in certain areas, resulting in overcrowding, narrow streets, windowless houses, and sore-eyed children everywhere. The streets smelled of urine, and the bazaar was full of fly-infested booths, where families of Jews in black robes and skullcaps worked. The carpenters worked on prehistoric lathes, and the children learned the craft at a young age. As Orwell lit a cigarette, a frenzy of Jews rushed towards him, clamoring for a cigarette. Even the blind man came out of his booth, groping in the air with his hand. Orwell realized that these people worked 12 hours a day and saw cigarettes as an impossible luxury. Orwell's experience in Marrakech was a window into the world of colonialism, where the poor and marginalized people were left to fend for themselves in terrible conditions. He saw the Jews and the Arabs as individuals with their own struggles and dreams, and he realized that their plight was not due to any inherent inferiority or lack of humanity. Rather, it was the result of a system that benefited a few at the expense of many. Orwell's experience in Marrakech was a stark reminder of the inequalities and injustices that existed in the world, and it inspired him to continue his fight for a more just and equitable society.
All people who work with their hands are partly invisible, and the more important the work they do, the less visible they are. Still, a white skin is always fairly conspicuous. In Northern Europe, when you see a laborer plowing a field, you probably give him a second glance. In a hot country, anywhere south of Gibraltar or east of Suez, the chances are that you don't even see him. I have noticed this again and again. In a tropical landscape, one's eye takes in everything except the human beings. It takes in the dried-up soil, the prickly pear, the palm tree, and the distant mountain, but it always misses the peasant hoeing at his patch. He is the same color as the earth, and a great deal less interesting to look at. It is only because of this that the starved countries of Asia and Africa are accepted as tourist resorts. No one would think of running cheap trips to the distressed areas. But where the human beings have brown skins, their poverty is simply not noticed. What does Morocco mean to a Frenchman? An orange grove or a job in government service? or to an Englishman. Camels, castles, palm trees, foreign legionnaires, brass trays, and bandits. One could probably live here for years without noticing that for 9/10 of the people the reality of life is an endless, back-breaking struggle to wring a little food out of an eroded soil. Most of Morocco is so desolate that no wild animal bigger than a hare can live on it. Huge areas which were once covered with forest have turned into a treeless waste where the soil is exactly like broken-up brick. Nevertheless, a good deal of it is cultivated, with frightful labor. Everything is done by hand. Long lines of women, bent double like inverted capital L, work their way slowly across the fields, tearing up the prickly weeds with their hands, and the peasant gathering lucerne for fodder pulls it up stalk by stalk instead of reaping it, thus saving an inch or two on each stalk. The plow is a wretched wooden thing, so frail that one can easily carry it on one's shoulder, and fitted underneath with a rough iron spike which stirs the soil to a depth of about 4 inches. This is as much as the strength of the animals is equal to. It is usual to plow with a cow and a donkey yoked together. 2 donkeys would not be quite strong enough, but on the other hand 2 cows would cost a little more to feed. The peasants possess no harrows, they merely plow the soil several times over in different directions, finally leaving it in rough furrows, after which the whole field has to be shaped with hoes into small oblong patches, to conserve water. Except for a day or two after the rare rainstorms there is never enough water. Along the edges of the field's channels are hacked out to a depth of 30 or 40 feet to get at the tiny trickles which run through the subsoil. Every afternoon a file of very old women passes down the road outside my house, each carrying a load of firewood. All of them are mummified with age and the sun, and all of them are tiny. It seems to be generally the case in primitive communities that the women, when they get beyond a certain age, shrink to the size of children. One day a poor old creature who could not have been more than 4 feet tall crept past me under a vast load of wood. I stopped her and put a 5 piece, a little more than a farthing, into her hand. She answered with a shrill wail, almost a scream, which was partly gratitude but mainly surprise. I suppose that from her point of view, by taking any notice of her, I seemed almost to be violating a law of nature. She accepted her status as an old woman, that is to say as a beast of burden. When a family is traveling it is quite usual to see a father and a grown-up son riding ahead on donkeys, and an old woman following on foot, carrying the baggage. But what is strange about these people is their invisibility. For several weeks, always at about the same time of day, the file of old women had hobbled past the house with their firewood, and though they had registered themselves on my eyeballs I cannot truly say that I had seen them. Firewood was passing, that was how I saw it. It was only that one day I happened to be walking behind them, and the curious up and down motion of a load of wood drew my attention to the human being underneath it. Then for the first time I noticed the poor old earth-colored bodies reduced to bones and leathery skin, bent double under the crushing weight. Yet I suppose I had not been 5 minutes on Moroccan soil before I noticed the overloading of the donkeys and was infuriated by it. There is no question that the donkeys are damnably treated. The Moroccan donkey is hardly bigger than a Saint Bernard dog. It carries a load which in the British Army would be considered too much for a 15-hands mule, and very often its pack saddle is not taken off its back for weeks together. But what is peculiarly pitiful is that it is the most willing creature on earth. It follows its master like a dog and does not need either bridle or halter. After a dozen years of devoted work it suddenly drops dead, whereupon its master tips it into the ditch and the village dogs have torn its guts out before it is cold. This kind of thing makes one's blood boil, whereas on the whole the plight of human beings does not. I am not commenting, merely pointing to a fact. People with brown skins are next door invisible. Anyone can be sorry for the donkey with its gelled back, but it is generally owing to some kind of accident if one even notices the old woman under her load of sticks.
Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content. For more information about Morocco, visit our website morocconation.com.